And I'm really happy we have Liz today as the first speaker. So those of you who don't know Liz, she joined MSDI in October last year with the education team. So actually Liz and I met on a job interview for a different position, and I said, well, actually, you know, maybe you should talk to Annette as where, given your passion and your research and education. So that came around, and since then Liz has been at MSDI. So you recently finished your PhD on this particular topic, the contribution of higher education to student learning for sustainability. And I think that's great that you did a PhD on education for sustainability because it's bridging sort of the topics of education and research, but also for a more general reason. I think there's a lot of talk about universities needing to have impact on society, and arguably you could actually say the biggest impact that university have is through our students. And so of course, we collaborate with industries and policies and so on and so forth, but educating our students in a way that they come at important positions where they can be influential in the future. If we can teach them differently how to look at sustainability in a holistic way, I think that's the biggest impact we can have. And I'm really happy that, Liz, that you've been studying how to do that and what sort of educational systems and processes need to be in place. So that's what we'll hear from you about today. So Liz informed me she will be talking for roughly about 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. So there's going to be plenty of room for discussion and questions and comments. So please think of those when you're listening to Liz. The floor is yours, Liz.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. So good afternoon. And it's good to see you having your lunch, which means that makes my presentation a little bit tastier and a little bit more interesting, I hope. Last year, Gitanjali and a group of other people from Monash University went overseas to a conference. And in one of Gitanjali's emails, she wrote, "We're not doing enough. We need to increase our impact by tenfold. That our current approach is, a little bit lacking." So I guess this, and Monash University is in such a great position where sustainability is a huge theme, and it's a theme across operations and research and extension, consulting, etc. Regrettably, not so strong in the teaching side as yet. So it kind of reflects a little bit, to some extent, the ad hoc approach that is being taken in higher education towards sustainability. And this research really asks the question, well, given this scenario of this ad hoc approach to sustainability education in tertiary institutions, how do graduates come out at the end? What do they see as their role in sustainability? What do they see as their role as individuals, as professionals, and as citizens to create the changes that we need? So the presentation today will focus primarily on the PhD thesis, which I'm relieved to say passed last year. Huge sigh of relief. And it's not focusing entirely on all the research that was done in the project, but just on the thesis itself. So today's presentation will talk a little bit about the scope of the PhD and the specific research aims. I'll talk a little bit about the conceptual framework that guided the research. Talk about how I approached the research in terms of the methodology and how that fell out in terms of the series of studies that came out of it. The main findings I've grouped into themes, and I apologise in advance that there will be quite a bit of repetition in some of these themes and in some of the recommendations, and maybe that's deliberate. And finally, some conclusions. So my PhD focused on how sustainability education specifically influences students' views, attitudes, behaviours, and the development of their capability to contribute to sustainability transitions. Now, some research has been done already on how individual units affect students' views and attitudes, or how it affects their behaviours. But what I was really interested in was, how does that affect the transitions? Not just what they do, but how does that feed into sustainability transitions and getting the wider societal changes? The specific research aims were to, firstly, look at, well, where do students start from when they come into their courses? What are their existing views and attitudes? What are the existing perspectives before they undertake any sustainability education? So what's their starting point? Once they're exposed to sustainability education in the tertiary curricula, what happens then to those students' perspectives on sustainability, and what are the factors that moderate any changes that we might observe? And finally, to dive deeply into the experience of transformative learning in sustainability education and say, well, how does that occur and what are the conditions that facilitate or hinder that process? So how did I conceptualize the study? How was it actually thought about in terms of a theoretical framework? Essentially, and forgive the text-heavy slides, they will be text-heavy slides, and the reason they're text-heavy is because my memory's shot and I need it to prompt me, and also for the purpose of redundancy. If you don't want to hear me, you can read the slides. So it brought together theories across 3 different fields. So I could investigate the relationship between learning and people's worldviews and how that translates into personal actions and agency for wider social change. The 3 theories are in environmental psychology, which is about human behaviour towards the attitudes and behaviour towards the environment, and that was based on Stern's value belief norm model. Now that's probably the most widely used model that is used to examine environmental behaviours. There are others, but that's the one that's well known, and it actually had the components that I was looking for. The model was operationalised through a number of scales that were meant to measure these attitudes and behaviours. And these scales included the NEP, which is the new ecological paradigm. That is a measure of how people view the environment from the old perspective to a newer, more ecological perspective. The INS scale is the inclusion of nature in self scale, is a scale that shows a relationship of the individual to nature, how closely connected they are. And finally, the HWN scale is the hierarchy with nature scale, is a scale that I developed. And I don't know that anyone else will ever use it, but I used it because I just wanted to diagrammatically represent to students the hierarchy between ourselves and nature. You know, was there a hierarchical relationship and how did they conceive that? So that was how I looked at environmental psychology. I brought in education and learning, theories about education and learning to understand how people learn, what are the processes and what kind of learning do we get. In terms of the transformative learning, I've borrowed and used Mesiro's theory of perspective transformation, which is a theory that's based on cognitive shifts in people's perspectives. These are major shifts in people's perspectives that occur when people are exposed to a disorienting dilemma. And they go, and this is a 10-step process that elaborates how individuals traverse this difficult disorienting dilemma and come out at the other end. And there are the 10 steps, and that was part of the theory. And finally, I introduced concepts and models from sustainability transitions theory, and I brought in 2. The transition management model, which is the S-curve. The S-curve is a generalized curve of complex system change. And also aspects of the multi-level perspective, which look at niches, you know, the micro, macro and the meso level, actors and agency. And I brought that in because I wanted to talk about actors and agency. So those 3 came together in this framework to enable me to be able to conceptualize how does sustainability education influence people in terms of their views and attitudes. How does that then, what is the learning process that's involved and what are the outcomes that come from sustainability education? And how does that then, those outcomes of knowledge, behaviour, attitudes and agency actually translate into their capability to contribute to these wider societal changes? So this is what it looks like. So the top one is really just representing transformative learning in education, sustainability education, which, now this is not a linear model. It was just conceptualized this way so that I could think about how to approach this PhD. How does that feed into people's beliefs, values and norms, which cascade into a series of actions? And the actions, particularly, the reason why I chose this is because it enabled me to investigate higher education. The types of actions that Stern had categorized were 4 groups. These were how people behave in organizations. This is their professional behavior, if you like, how they act in their own private sphere, in their own home, with their friends. Public sphere is kind of advocacy, but passive advocacy. And then we're looking at activism. So this is the kind of wide range of actions that can feed into sustainability transition. Okay. So that's the conceptual framework. How did I go about doing it? How was it operationalized? Well, in truth, this PhD might have officially started in 2015, but the research began a long time before that. And it's an evolutionary progression of inquiry. It was informed by the paradigm, the way I thought about it, the epistemology, ontology, if you like, was an interpretive paradigm with a constructivist approach. This basically just means that people have their own interpretations of sustainability. It's not a fixed thing. It's not like gravity or time. And the way that people's perceptions change is through a constructivist approach. Now, later on when I go into the findings, you'll see that that's not quite the way it works, but that's the approach that's been taken. That says that people's learning is based not just on what they experience now, but on their history of what they know and their existing knowledge from prior experiences. So in terms of methodology, it was conducted in 3 stages. And I'll talk about those stages. I'll show you those stages in a minute. Stages 1 and 2 were based on pre and post surveys, which had open and closed-ended questions. So that was the mixed method, the approach that was used. And quite a lot of really interesting insights came from those open responses. Stage 3 adopted both a pre-post survey and subsequent in-depth interviews, but my thesis didn't report on all those findings. And I might add that the juiciest things out of this research came from the interviews, which I've yet to fully analyse, but I've got some preliminary results and I'm quite happy to share those with you if time permits. So the thesis only looked at the post-test survey, and Susan knows because she's had a quick look at one of the papers that's involved. And each stage was informed by the previous stage, what was found. And not only that, because it occurred over a long period of time, it was also informed by what was happening in the literature. As we were approaching the end of the decade of education for sustainable development, a lot of studies came out that looked at the pre-post that weren't there when I first started the research. So it was an evolutionary progression of inquiry. This is how it played out in terms of the studies and the stages. Stage 1 was my initial literature review where I conceptualized, if you like, the research. It's what it gave me the boundaries and the scope of what I was looking at. So the initial literature review was published in 2011, and it looked at learning, conceptions of sustainability, the role and progress of higher education in Australia and around the world. This is going back in 2010, so things have changed a bit. But also the role and progress of the business sector in Australia and around the world. And the results showed that they were both in the very, very early stages of sustainability. As a result of that literature review and presentations to my colleagues where I was working at the time, CQUniversity, we initiated a pilot study at our institution with business students and IT students. That was an action-oriented research study that had several stages and occurred over 2 years. It focused on mostly international students, so it was kind of limited in scope and limited in scale. That looked at attitudes and behaviours. And the case study was a reflection of my teaching over the course of 10 years. Jeez, that long. And that included feedback from students, the pre and post surveys, and a variety of other inputs, discussions with students, group discussions, etc., student feedback on the courses. And it really just shows that one is a case study of embedding sustainability in business programs and what impact that had on students over a long period of time. Now, the results of this are obviously limited in terms of what you can say, in terms of transferring them to a broader field. So it was decided then to reach out to other universities in other countries as well as Australia to do a much larger study, to do it en masse, if you like. So this was situated at one institution. This went out to 9 institutions. Actually, the core went out and we had about 25 expressions of interest, quite a lot of them from overseas as well as Australia. But in the end, 9 institutions were able to provide enough data for us to do international comparisons, interdisciplinary comparisons, interlocational comparisons, pre and post surveys over 3 years that looked at what was the influence of higher education. So that gave us the scale, the mass, that allowed me to make some interesting observations about what worked and what didn't work, and what factors influenced changes. What that showed was that there were essentially two things. Well, the most important thing is this. The biggest changes came where students were doing dedicated sustainability education courses, not when it was just sprinkled into a course somewhere. And because of that, the third study involved 2 institutions, one in Queensland, one in Victoria, where we looked at how students experienced their learning, how they experienced transformative learning in these sustainability education scenarios. That paper is under review. That looks at how did students experience transformative learning and what were the factors that influenced it. So what were the findings? 8 major themes, I would say, dropped out of that. There's a bit of overlap, but here they are. One is about the challenge of implementing sustainability in higher education. Now, this is probably old news to you, so I'll just go through it quickly. What were the learning outcomes when we did have sustainability education in higher ed? The fact that holistic sustainability is a really challenging concept. I'll talk about what the findings were about that and some recommendations. What happens when we try to develop sustainability competencies? How do they come about? What actually does occur from this ad hoc approach to sustainability education? And considering sustainability education as part of a total learning system. Now, this is not news to most people in this space who know that learning doesn't happen in chunks. But a lot of educators seem to think that it does. So I'll talk a little bit about the context of sustainability education to help students connect the dots. What effects does it actually have on personal behaviour and, importantly, on the agency? Again, agency being in terms of contributing to sustainability transitions. The importance of maintaining optimism, and I'll talk a little bit about what actually happens now with this approach that we're adopting and what are the problematics around that. And finally, the influence, and this is, for me, controversial, but I'll put it out there and hope I don't get shot down. What is the influence of this free choice learning and teaching and agency in sustainability education? Okay, the first one, the context of contexts. Everything happens within a context. Some of the external challenges that are faced by educators, or in higher education in particular, is that, have I got a pointer? It doesn't work. Sustainability education, we know, is a great opportunity for higher education to implement, but it's a huge, huge challenge. It challenges pretty much everything higher education does in terms of its teaching, its structures, its programs, its faculty structure, etc. And it's a real challenge. But it's also a real challenge because the role of higher ed in sustainability is still really strongly contested. I might say, without prejudice, that it's mostly contested in Anglo-Saxon countries, Latin America, are the 2 main regions where it's still most strongly contested. In countries like Europe, in regions like Europe, it's not as strongly contested. They have a much more accepted view of the role of higher ed. There appears to be a lack of political leadership in terms of the higher education sector, even in Australia. And in many institutions, there's a lack of academic leadership in terms of implementing sustainability education. Importantly, in that context, the key gatekeepers are the academics. Because there's no academic leadership or sectoral leadership, the leadership cascades down, if you like, to the academics who themselves are the gatekeepers and who themselves make decisions about how and when to introduce sustainability and what aspects of sustainability they'll bring into their course. And usually that's based on their personal values, their personal motivations, and their personal capabilities. And even academics who want to introduce sustainability into the courses are often constrained by a whole range of factors, including their own faculty. If they are the black sheep in the faculty who wants to, I see them nodding there, if they're the black sheep in the faculty, because it's, depending on your faculty and depending on your institution, you could be accused of subversion. And I can attest to that with my own experience at CQU. We were allowed to talk about sustainability, we were allowed to teach sustainability, but we weren't allowed to tell anyone else about it. It was regarded as subversive activity. Not just the faculty, there are disciplinary traditions as well that constrain our ability to teach sustainability and how we teach it. There are professional bodies and sectoral organisations that also have certain demands on what the graduate is expected to do and or not. And if without the imperative coming from them, there's no there's no pull to get the graduates coming out with these kind of qualities and knowledges. Aside from the sector and the teachers, the students themselves also present huge challenges to sustainability education. The very high heterogeneity in students' initial values and dispositions presents a barrier to how they perceive sustainability and how they respond to it. And for a lot of the students in the studies, there was a perception that it was not important. There was a lack of motivation to learn this stuff. It wasn't considered to be, relevant. Anyway, I'm actually going into the results here. I need to pull back a bit. And there's a strong resistance to the concept, even the concept of sustainability. And I can attest to that just from reading the comments from the students in the surveys, from the interviews and from my own experience in teaching this at La Trobe University, where I taught into a dedicated sustainability education unit for business students, the resistance that we got from students. One, to the notion of sustainability, and two, what's it doing in my program? And because of these difficulties, it's very difficult to situate sustainability within their field of studies and within their profession. So, what are the recommendations? I think that for me, they were pretty self-evident. You've just got to put it into the course. You've got to embed it. No, that doesn't work. You've got to embed it deeply into the course, not just sprinkle it in. And when I say embed it deeply, make it part of the curriculum. Not that learning activities are not important, because in my experience, that's what I did. When I was teaching at CQU, I was just a teacher at the Melbourne campus. The curriculum, learning activities and assessments were all determined by regional Queensland. We were just delivering content. But I was able to bring some learning activities in, some case studies, some discussion, and even that had some effect. But the way to get, deeper results is to embed it deeply. And when I say embed it deeply, put it into the curriculum as content and put it in as assessment. And that's what this is. If you can situate sustainability as part of formative assessment, it drives learning. And it motivates them, and it shows them that it's relevant. Now, yes, that's an extrinsic motivation. That's okay. That's fine. That'll do. And it should be connected to their perceptions of relevance. It should be explained to them at the outset, very much. Why are we doing this? How is it relevant to you? Not just to you, but to your profession and to your profession and to your personal lives. So the main thing is mandate it. Put it into the courses. Simple to say, I know it's hard to do, but first best option is to mandate it. Put it into the curriculum, an assessment of regular courses, not special extra courses, regular courses. When I was at CQU, I was teaching finance, economics and marketing, and in none of those did we have sustainability. and I was teaching international students who came in with a very different perception of sustainability, and when they left the courses, I was fearful for what those graduates would be producing in the world, which is actually what stimulated the research in the first place, right? Oh my God, what are you guys going to do when you get out there? I'll give you an example in finance. In finance, right? In finance, we teach students to shift risk and shift cost to everybody else, including the natural environment. That's what we teach students. So forget about talking about social responsibility or corporate responsibility. That didn't come into finance at all. It didn't come into marketing. It didn't come into economics. So what are we graduating out there? So put it into the courses and put it into the assessment. Okay, next. When we did have sustainability in courses, what were the effects? Notably, they were mixed and they were weak. When I say mixed, the scales that we had, the pre and post scales were meant to show us how students shifted. Interestingly, there were negative effects. Students who started off with a concern over here, some of them shifted down, which was, for me, an extraordinary result. But then again, in those days, I don't think I was quite as worldly wise as I am now. Yeah, it shocked me. Yeah, some results were negative and some were positive. So even though overall, statistically, they showed no appreciable difference, the positive and negative shifts actually masked each other. And the results that did come out were weak. So the ad hoc approach to sustainability education produces results that are weak. Weak in terms of changes in perspectives and weak in terms of behaviour. Oh, wow. Okay. Gee, I might have to go for another 10. Is that okay? Do I have your permission to go for another 10? Okay. So the attitudes varied according to their personal context. I'll rush through this. And the effects of sustainability education were quite different across disciplines, levels of study, geographic location, as well as the personal context. So the thing that concerned me more than anything, and the thing that surprised my colleagues as well at La Trobe Uni, where we did the research, and at CQU, was that after sustainability education, students, and even with regular education, students' views converge to this eco-modernism approach. This integrative eco-humanist or ecological modernization approach, which looks at technical solutions to problems. Essentially what it says is, yes, I know that there are problems. Yes, I'm aware of the ecological damage that we're creating, but technology will fix everything. I don't have to do anything. We don't have to change anything. So there's no learning there about social systems and how they might change. Okay, what do I recommend? Educators should be encouraged to take a more critical approach to their own disciplines, to their own courses, and to seek to explore how their particular profession links into sustainability transitions, so that they see themselves as part of a bigger picture. That they should actually explore and teach for strong sustainability, not weak sustainability, and to start to investigate and call attention to political power and the processes of change, and to think about how these political structures resist the challenges that sustainability poses to their power. Provide training and resources to help educators to do this, and also to help students develop critical thinking skills, which they're not that good at, as it turns out. Okay. When students do change, when they get a huge shift in their perspective, we say that they cross a threshold or a liminal space. So when does that happen? Well, it doesn't happen very often because holistic sustainability is a huge challenge to students. Not for us, because maybe we're always thinking this way or we're comfortable with this way. But students are used to a monodisciplinary approach. They're used to solutions being presented to them and theories being presented to them. But the idea of breaking down their own barriers and reconfiguring them is a big challenge. And it's often really resisted. It creates a cognitive overload. Now, what tends to happen when we introduce holistic sustainability is that students focus on instrumental learning outcomes, you know, how are we going to fix it, what are the technical solutions? They often resist critical thinking, and particularly critical self-reflection, to think about what are their assumptions premised on, what are their worldviews premised on. They're very resistant to critical self-reflection. But when it was working, when it did occur with students, it was facilitated by a range of factors. Firstly, because this is such a difficult space. Remember, we're pulling the rug out from people's feet, where they stand. So they have to unlearn and relearn. Provide them with support. Support from the teacher and from their friends and relatives was really important to students so that they could talk it through. Provide with a range of resources for them to undertake their own research. That exploration into sustainability opened their minds. And encourage them to create solutions or products. Encourage them to create them. And that way, what they do is they situate the learning to themselves. Okay. Recommendations. We can reduce cognitive overload through this guided discovery process. This is a really interesting concept that I very much like, and I think it's particularly relevant to sustainability education, which is so challenging. Because what we tend to do as educators is say to students, here's the sustainability problem, go and find a solution. And that's too much. It's too much. One, the concept is a cognitive overload, and then to go out and find solutions just doubles that, multiplies that difficulty. So guided discovery says that you should combine guided learning, which is direct instruction about the complexity of sustainability, and then encourage them to go off into some discovery learning. Now what do you do? But don't leave them to try to do both. So this is when they get a chance to transfer their learning about the concept into real situations. Provide a range of resources, and I've put this here because I was particularly interested in some of the projects that were talked about on Monday at the cross-disciplinary meeting, but I'm also aware of all the other really good projects that we've got running here. Even things like, and I'll talk a little bit about the green steps and leave no one behind, all of those activities are really important, but get students to actually transfer their learning, get them to work in groups, undertake research and find solutions, create solutions. Motivation and resistance, I'll go through this very briefly, were really big issues in sustainability education. Where we did get the development of professional skills for sustainability, it occurred, how that manifested was through developing more enhanced problem-solving skills. So even the competency to be able to think in systems and to think about complex versus simple problems is a competency that's really important. And that did come out. They developed a capability for teamwork and group work and collaboration. They developed a better understanding of themselves and others. So this kind of interpersonal, intersubjectivity. And they also gained insights on how to create change. Motivation was important before the fact, during the fact, and after the fact. It's a key thing. So finding ways to motivate students is critical in sustainability education. Because competencies are so important, the suggestion is to focus on students' professional competencies and put these kinds of competencies for sustainability into all of the faculties, all of the disciplines, because it's relevant for all of them. Okay, connecting the dots. How are we going for time? Shit. Learning is a holistic process. What we found was that when we connected learning in the classroom with learning that was going on in other aspects of their life world, and also back into their lived experience, we got really deeper connections. And that's when students started to transform. Not from what happened in the classroom, but by connecting what they were learning there with other things that were happening in their life, their professional life, their personal life, their community work, all sorts of other areas, and reflecting back on the things they'd learned earlier in their life. Yeah. Okay. limited behavioural change. Agency was rare. The emergence of agency to go out and make change in the world was very, very rare. In this particular scenario of ad hoc approach to sustainability education, agency is a very, very rare commodity. And it happens when students connect the dots. But they connect the dots by themselves. We don't help them connect these dots. We just focus on that core unit. But we don't really help them connect the dots so much. And that's an area that we could focus on. And I've put that here. You know, in the absence, ideally, formally have a coordinated systems approach, a learning system approach to our education that coordinates our learning, not just across the course, which is the sequence of units, but of course, but to all other aspects of the life world. That formal connection across the course is the ideal, but if we can't do that, individual educators can still link their students' learning with their life world. That's just an educational practice. Limited spheres of influence. What does that mean? What did they actually do? You know, there was some change in knowledge and awareness. It didn't necessarily translate into behavioural changes. And those behavioural changes were limited to the private sphere. Remember the 4 groups? They were limited to the private sphere. Wider agency was very limited, and it emerged in an ad hoc way because of the way they connected the dots. And they did that by themselves. So to enhance transformative learning and the development of agency, we should provide more opportunities for our students to synergise their learning, not just across their course, but across the campus. Green steps, leave no one behind. Other projects that MSDI is doing, other initiatives that MU is involved in. And that will bring it about, even if you don't have it in every single course. Just those connections, because we saw it happen with the students when they did it by themselves. Imagine how much more we could get if we helped them connect the dots. The last thing I want to talk, there's actually 2 more, but I'll go through this. The biggest problem, I think, in the way sustainability education is presented is that we problematize it too much for students. We are accustomed to it. We are comfortable with it. We sit with complexity, we sit with uncertainty, we sit with this multi-perspective. We sit with the uncertainty of it all, but students have a real problem with that. And we problematize it way too much for students. We tend to focus on, you know, the hurdles and the barriers, instead of focusing on the positive things, which are the opportunities and the gains. And that's an important thing. Most students were in despair when they did the interdisciplinary units in particular. They were just despondent. And some previous activists threw their hands up in the air and said, "Oh, this is too hard. I'm giving up on this. I'm going to go and hide in a cave somewhere for a few years and because this is too hard. I can't do this. It's not going to work." So these are some of the results that came out. But the good news, and here's the key thing for me, even if you sprinkle it into the course, even if you just put it in there, yeah, what tends to happen is because they're exposed to it, it now becomes part of their mental landscape. There is a greater acceptance in students of the complexity of sustainability and of the need for greater discourse and discussion about stronger responses to it. So it changes the narrative in society, yeah? So it may not create agents, it may not create change agents, but it will create change acceptors. Does that make sense? So, important to explore strong sustainability and to investigate the political processes, power structures, and to think about how society changes. Talk to students about how society changes. Show them examples of how society changed in the past, because society is always changing. And the important thing is not to poo-poo activism. Activism is a critical component of every social change we've ever experienced. So that's an important part as well. Okay. This just says, you know what? Compared to what we expected, there's a huge cascade of chasms to what we actually get. For a variety of reasons. But the main ones are this ongoing contestation about what sustainability and sustainable development means and the role of higher education, and importantly, this free choice nature of learning and teaching. Yeah. This is also an important point. We rely very much on individual behaviour change, and I think that's really problematic. One, because it's not happening as a result of our current approaches to sustainability education. And there's no guarantee that we'll have enough individuals wanting to change that will create a tipping point for society to change. Certainly not the way we're doing it. We need to challenge this dominant ideology of neoliberalism that says individual responsibility, individual change, and everything will just fix itself up. We need a more critical perspective to think about shifting the risk away from individuals to social change and helping students understand that. Conclusion. This free choice approach is not giving us the results we want. It's leading to results that are weak and too dispersed to build the momentum that's necessary to create this change. We cannot get the momentum because of the way we're doing it now. It's too weak and too dispersed for that kind of change to occur. It needs to be a coordinated, sequential, connected, and a relevant inclusion in all programs. First best solution. But if we can't get that, then at least educators can link to the student's life world and lived experience. We need to emphasise the importance of it to students, to ground their learning in their own life world, yeah, and to progressively scaffold these competencies throughout the program. So a one shot is not going to inoculate them. They need to see it over and over again, and they will build over time. If we do a cumulative approach, then perhaps we'll get these progressive shifts in students' knowledge and attitudes and behaviours, and eventually the development of their competence and their capability to contribute to sustainability transitions, not necessarily as change agents, but as change acceptors. So thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry it took so long.
Thanks, Liz, for a wonderful presentation, and also, I guess, putting us a bit with of feedback on the ground. So I started my introduction saying the most impact universities have is through our students. Maybe you have to reconsider that statement, given the challenges you just presented us with, to really be influential through our students. But I won't talk so much, just want to open up the floor for questions and comments. Yep, Dirk, go ahead. And yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Liz, for that. I really enjoyed that, and it really resonated for me as an educator who's been involved in legal education, a different type of professional education for the last 20 years, and I can see the problem that you presented around sustainability education coming in legal education. I've seen it in how we teach Indigenous curriculum, in how we teach family violence, in how we teach anything other than court-based adjudication. And one of the things I've noticed is that change comes, and you've really focused on inside the classroom, and it really resonated for me. I'm wondering if we think beyond the classroom, one of the things I've noticed is that change in that area tends to come when, not in incremental, but often in great big steps. Yeah. And it might be the professional body gets on board and says, you know what, it's going to be in the curriculum, we're putting it there, and if you want to be an accountant, then you have to understand about sustainability. Or a whole lot of deans across faculties get together and say, you know what, we're going to put this in our graduate attributes, and that has to be there. What would you see as instrumental in getting sustainability education, particularly as it's across many professions, as necessary in getting some of those big steps happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, one of the things that I really focused on that got me thinking about how the sustainability contribute to social change was, well, how does social change occur? How do organisations change? How do schools change? How do individuals change? And it seems to me, and this is shown in the literature as well, that in all major complex system changes, you need, and that's why I pull on the MLP, that particular one, is because you actually need impetus at all three levels. You need the impetus from on high, from the macro level, you know, the mandate. Yes? You've got to do it. The mandate, you've got to do it. You have to have the means to do it, so the people who are involved have to be able to do it. You have to have the facilities and infrastructure and the administrative support systems there to enable that change to occur. And then you have to have the motive down here, which is the people wanting to learn it. So it really has to happen at all three levels. Which one goes first? You know what, in talking to lots of different institutions about how they go about it, I've had stories of shifts towards sustainability being student-led at Melbourne University. That's what actually started a lot of the shifts towards sustainability there. In Tasmania, it came from the Vice-Chancellor. In other institutions, it came from the academics. So it starts in different places, but unless those three cogwheels link up, you're not going to get the transformation. But the reason why I'm saying put it into every program is that when our graduates leave, at least they'll be open to the possibility of those changes. Yeah?
Thanks, Liz. Very, very good presentation. I just want to understand a little bit better your point around the problematization of sustainability, because I just want to understand exactly what your finding and recommendation, because it, said, well, on one level we pose it too much as a problem and as a challenge and all the barriers, but then you also said that at least the exposure to complexity makes them more open to live with complexity throughout, and because I think we've often found that if you sort of present it almost too simplistically, then people just, that's why they converge on this sort of techno-utopianism or eco-modernism and so on, because they just, it's a problem, but it's an easy solution if you don't almost problematize it. So I just want to understand a little bit better your findings and recommendation.
Sustainability in and of itself is a complex endeavor. It's not complex because we made it complex, it is complex. But the way that sustainability educators, particularly regular educators like me who want to teach it in their courses, and I referred to CQU thinking of sustainability education as subversion, think about it in that context as well, is that we're not really permitted to do anything other than say, here it is, here's the problem, you go and find the solution. It's almost like if you do try to help them find a solution and try to make it easier for them to deal with, then you're accused of being subversive. You're accused of being prescriptive, and we can't be prescriptive. The field is very much influenced by the environmental educators. So there's kind of the ESD and the EE, different camps and schools. But the EE school, the environmental education school, has this notion of you can't tell people what to do and you can't tell them how to do it. That's very much the idea of this is the field. We can tell them about it, but then they go off and find the solutions. So we tend to focus on the problems rather than saying, and one of the recommendations that I didn't talk about was, and I think this is really important, yes, it's a problem. Don't make it like hell though. Don't make it so insurmountable that people think, I can't deal with this. I don't have the capacity or the motivation to deal with this, and they back away. If we can provide them with examples of niche exemplars, in that kind of sustainability transition model, we've got the niche operators. If we can give them examples of where niches are actually successful in tackling sustainability, students will see that as a route out of the darkness of complex sustainability. Because remember, we're pulling the rug out from underneath them and we're leaving them in this dark space to fend for themselves. That's what it feels like for students. That's why I'm saying we problematize it too much. Yeah? And the good thing that comes out of this is that they learn about complexity. It doesn't mean that they can deal with it. It means that they conceptualize it. Was there another part to your question that I didn't get?
There's a question from Andrea.
Thank you. Okay, so it's following up on that question.
Yeah.
Does it depend on the field of studies that they are? As in, I can see why some disciplines would be excited with that complexity and trying to solve a problem, and how others would be scared of it and thinking that there is no way of or avoiding it.
Okay.
And and another one that is a bit related. Also, did it depend? Your results, did it depend in which year they were studying? As in.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I don't have a lot of experience there, but I've seen that when they are in their last years, they're already working or doing an internship, and that's when they say, well, this is not how the real world works.
And if they're in their earlier years, well, to me it seems easier to talk about this problem.
I saw differences in the impact. No, I didn't see any differences in the impact of sustainability education, but I did see differences in students' perspective based on their level of study. So whether they were undergrads or postgrads, there was a difference there in their perspectives. And the ones who were older tended to, interesting, the ones who were older had less robust ideas of sustainability than the younger ones, which was really interesting. What was your first question?
Field of study, sorry.
Field of study. Yeah, what we know already from the literature is that different disciplines conceptualize sustainability in completely different ways. And you don't find, well, rarely will you find across any institution that members of different faculties will have the same conception of sustainability. If anything, you'll get one or two of the pillars, you know, economy, environment, and society. I forgot about people. Economy, environment, and society. Rarely will you see those three. Yeah? So there is a difference in the way it's approached, and that's why I've recommended that academics are encouraged to be more critical of their own disciplines. What are the assumptions that sit under, what are the value assumptions and the other assumptions that sit under your discipline? Yeah? And how does your discipline connect to the other disciplines and to sustainability? It's really important that they know how it connects. Yeah.
Lisetta, thank you. I think there's a lot in there that we need to go into more detail in the education team, because I think what you're saying is spot on. I want to pick up on your recommendations or your observations that individual behaviour change is not enough, and we all know that. Yeah. What we're teaching through mainly ad hoc approaches is essentially ineffective in creating change, even in personal lives, let alone agency, which is really what we're wanting to get our students to move towards. In terms of where we should be focusing, and I'm thinking about MSDI, yeah. I know other universities have taken on social change degrees, master's degrees, where you're looking at essentially movements, movements of groups, and I'm wondering whether you've got some recommendations about where we can focus our efforts. Okay. Because it's a huge agenda, and yeah. University is a difficult one to change. Sure. But with an MSDI, what could we do that really lifts us to a different scale of impact? I feel like a snowflake in hell here by saying this, but individual behaviour change is not going to get us the social change that we're looking for. Not unless maybe we change the way sustainability education is taught, where everybody gets it and they all change, and then, you know, the world magically changes. And that's why I focused on developing link the sustainability competencies to the professional competencies. Don't call it sustainability. Just focus on those areas, you know, of group work, collaboration, what I call it, forward thinking, strategic approaches, interdisciplinarity, group work, collaboration, systems thinking, complex thinking. That in itself, those tools will be enough for students to be able to, no matter what their profession, go out and do something with sustainability. That's the first thing. Link it to professional competencies. The second thing is, I think we really need to teach students about social change. And one of the things that helps me understand that as a teacher, with every class that I've ever taught, every cohort that I've ever taught, I try to contextualize knowledge for them and say, you know what I'm teaching you in this semester, in this year, is based on current knowledge right now. But that's changed over time. You know, all knowledge is created, and all knowledge changes over time. And all systems change over time. So this is not the tablets from God that come down and say this is the truth. It's just where we are right now. And guess what? Things will change in the future. So I think contextualizing what people know now in a wider field of change is important. Does that make sense? That's a very opaque answer, and I'll be more specific. If I can remember what I was going to say. Damn this brain. Help educators be more critical. help educators and ourselves as well, maybe develop courseware, maybe develop some training programs for the educators, or develop courseware for students that teaches social change. Teach social change. The processes, the powers, the hegemonic structures, and how it changes. Yes, I know that is subversive. Is it? I don't think it is. I just think that's realistic.
Short question?
Yeah.
One short question, short answer.
Okay.
It's very short. Mine was around the motivation to learn about sustainability, and you sort of touched on that. And I think what we've started to do in Leave No Behind is stop talking really about sustainability and the SDGs and really focus on these development of these professional skills, which has enabled us to attract more students into the program. Because a challenge we have is that we're often engaging with students that are already interested in this stuff, whose values align to it, because extracurricular, they're opting into it. So, does that happen, obviously, with a set of conditions before they come into university, or does it happen in the first year? How can we leverage and sort of, it's around the motivation to
I think it goes back to the question that Gitanjali asked me, and my answer was to develop their professional competencies. You know, we live in a world where we're still arguing about what sustainability is and what it looks like, you know. And for me, that's wasted energy and wasted effort. But given that's the world that we live in, then don't make it a big issue. Don't make it dark. Don't make it difficult for them. Focus on what they are interested in. And one of the recommendations was, let them choose how they want to learn and what they want to learn about, even in sustainability education. And for the people who come to your programs, they're motivated by that particular thing. Leverage that particular thing. That's their value. Focus on that value, whatever that value. In business, we focus on monetary value. In arts, we focus on other types of value. So find a value lever and focus on that value lever to motivate them.
All right, we've got to stop here, Liz, but I think that was really good, and thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge that you gained over the past 10 years, I guess. So looking forward to how you're going to revolutionize the educational offerings of MSDI. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I can't believe I can talk that much.
Always takes more time.
Always takes more.